Echo VR, the closest VR ever was to really breaking into that esports scene. We'll get to the end of Echo VR and the unexpected return, but first I want to talk about why people were so dedicated to Echo. To really understand why Echo became so popular, we first need to remember what VR was like at the time. One of the biggest problems VR had at the time, and honestly still does, is that people weren't really taking advantage of the format. I mean, there's so much unique control you can have with a VR headset over something like a regular controller. And people are still just using it to mimic first-person shooters. Don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing. It's actually really fun. But do you see what I mean by it doesn't really take advantage of the capabilities of the VR systems? The biggest example I can think of right now of a game that does take advantage of the VR hardware is Gorilla Tag. Gorilla Tag thrives off being in VR. The whole allure of that game is its movement, which only can work with a VR headset, versus a game like Ghosts of Tabor, which can, and basically already does exist on non-VR systems. Echo VR was one of those games that really took advantage of being in VR. It was very unique, especially for a time when less people were making VR games. I believe that was the main reason Echo became as popular as it did. Just the concept of Echo is intriguing enough to grab your attention. You play as a robot chassis in a zero-gravity environment. To maneuver, you need to use wrist-mounted thrusters, as well as crawl across the terrain. You're in some sort of sleek, futuristic environment, and then you play frisbee soccer. It was a very unique idea, which is probably why they used it for a couple games. There was Echo Arena, which had a very similar style to Echo VR. In fact, it was nearly identical, but instead of playing frisbee soccer, it was a PvP game. I honestly preferred it to the former, but I think I'm in the minority in that opinion. That may only be because Echo VR was free and Echo Arena cost like $20 or something, so less people played it. There is also Lone Echo, which is a AAA story-focused game that takes place in the Echo universe. That game probably deserves its own video. Anyways, I don't know which one of these games came first, but the developers obviously knew it was a good enough concept to reuse. And they were right. Echo was popular because it was unique. Now, on top of Echo VR being free and interesting, I believe the other reason it was so popular was because the game scratched an itch that many VR games really struggle with. Echo felt like a sports title. Sports games are hard to do in VR. Think about if they made like a Madden in VR. How would you move? You just stand there and push the thumbstick? No, that's lame. In fact, there's a good example of that I don't feel bad for slandering. Rec Room had a soccer game mode. How do you play soccer in a game where you have no legs? You just run into the ball. It was as boring as it sounds. So you need to have some more involved movement to make a VR sports game fun. The other big issue is if too many players are on the field at the same time, a lot of them don't really do anything, so cut the number of players down and condense the field to make the game more involved for everybody. Echo does this as well. So Echo was fun because it was an actually enjoyable VR sports game that took advantage of being in VR. So why'd they shut it down? From everything I read online, it sounds like the player base was dwindling and, more importantly, not bringing in enough money to support the game. Remember, Echo was free? And I imagine the new wave of VR users were more interested in other games than 7-year-old Echo. It's also worth noting that at some point before the shutdown, Echo's developers Ready at Dawn were acquired by Meta. So it's Meta's fault, you can blame Meta. Apparently they wanted Ready at Dawn to focus on another project. And I remember playing Echo. I don't remember a whole lot of people buying anything from the in-game store. So it was realistically a smart move for them to sell to Meta and do whatever project they wanted instead of going bankrupt trying to support Echo. However, one thing I do remember from the shutdown is that people were still playing. Yes, the player base was smaller, but the community was dedicated. And as I said at the beginning of the video, Echo was the closest chance VR had to break into the esports scene. People were really into this game. There was probably some way for them to keep it alive. It's unfortunate though. I'm really curious as to what Echo would have become if the game had stayed online. I mean, people are still talking about it today, so it clearly left an impact. But would the game have fizzled out like other VR games from the time? See my Rec Room video. Or would Echo have had a second prime? I don't know. What I do know is we can make an educated guess on what Echo would look like in the modern day, because the fellas in the Echo VR Lounge Discord server were able to pull Echo out of its grave. I'll link a tutorial to set that up in the description, but please finish my video first. The first thing you notice is that there's not a lot of people online, which is expected anytime there's hoops to jump through when doing something online. I will say I did not expect how much I had missed the in-game banter.
Hey Frosty, did you vote for Trump?
Did you vote for Putin?
No, I'm not in Russia.
I'm not in Russia. Yes, you are.
There's not much to say about this revival of Echo other than it's Echo. It's impressive that they were able to get this to work, especially in a way that kept Echo so faithful to the way it was. That'll about do it for this video though. What do you think would have happened to Echo if it stayed up? Let me know in the comments. Once again, I would greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. We're getting really close to 1,000 subscribers. And if you made it to the end, thank you for watching.